The super tall buildings that have been going up in New York City are bringing together a combination of zoning questions, building department issues, and ethical questions that are really the result of New York City's unique rules and regulations. The bottom line is that there's really a lot that's very unique to New York City, and a lot that really makes this only possible in New York. The video below that I'll put a link to has a nice summation of issues that are part of what makes this situation so unique. Some of these issues are things that I've waded through over the last 10 years in my own work in New York City, and I've certainly found that New York is a very unique place to try and get things built. There are a number of reasons why these super tall buildings have been showing up. Some of it has to do with opportunities around the way that incentive zoning was used. Some of it has to do with the way that building codes and zoning rules were being applied, and also how tax codes were being leveraged. And all of that really is part of the story for why these pencil towers have been showing up. So for instance, tax abatement opportunities that may have met specific requirements, but may not have necessarily meant the intent of the rules, have reportedly cost the city $1.7 billion just in this last fiscal year. And certainly while some people are benefiting from this, these tax abatements probably weren't what the city had intended when they had made those rules. Matthew Soules is featured in this video as well, and he wrote a whole book on the way that architecture is being used in new and overly capitalistic ways that have really been dialed up to 11 here in New York City. He refers to the skinny pencil towers that are on Billionaires Row as being architecture as spatio-financial form. And so what he's really saying is that this isn't just about shelter or even a cultural idea, it's about architecture that is a financial vehicle. Since these super tall pencil skyscrapers have been showing up, there have been lawsuits that have been following them. And so towers such as 432 Park Avenue have included complaints that related to broken pipes, broken sprinkler mains, flooding elevators, and noise that's just generally related to the building's movement and the building's sway. I think that some of this just has to do with the fact that these buildings are so slender, which means their width relative to their height is just so extreme. And it really just means that these things aren't easy to build. It means that the things that we use in other buildings might not be right for this situation. And so for instance, rigid pieces of sprinkler might just not be able to handle the movement that the building has just within sort of day-to-day activity. And the groaning between rooms is a little bit about the same thing, where it just might not have been put together in a way that alleviates that problem. And so even the building's insurance has been taking a hit, which has gone up by over 300% in 2 years. And it's in large part because of these water events that are being cited in the lawsuits. There's a lot going on here, and outside engineering companies have been called in to do reports and try to understand what's happening. So some of the reporting that we've seen is stating that electrical, mechanical, and plumbing components aren't even conforming with the developer's drawing, and that some of these actually might be real-life safety issues. And that brings up the safety issue. So to boil it down to very nuts and bolts issues, the thing that jumped out to me about 432 Park Avenue and some of the reporting that's been done is that they filed a string of 36 temporary certificates of occupancy, or TCOs, going back to 2015, which means that it is yet to certify its standpipe and sprinkler systems, and that's according to the New York Times. In my experience, the permitting in New York is a pretty wild ride. You can pretty much build an entire building using what they call Alt-2 permits, which are smaller permits that each subcontractor or each trade would be getting for their portion of the work. And you can do that before you even get your Alt-1 permit, which is the more overarching permit which controls the use and other major occupancy designations for the building. And that's just generally backwards compared to most other places that I've seen, where you have to obtain the main permit that governs your intended use, and then you get the secondary or the smaller permits after that. And so imagine being able to build an entire building only to realize that your final approval for the use, which you need for your occupancy, is going to be hard to get. And that's why when they set things up this way, I can understand why they would do it, because it does help you get work done quickly, but it's also very dangerous because you can end up granting year upon year of temporary occupancy certificates to a structure that hasn't actually passed its final safety requirements. And that's pretty much what's happening here at 432 Park. So It's also a situation where that might be okay for some projects in New York, but for brand new super tall skyscrapers in Manhattan that are pushing a lot of limits within the building industry, that may not be as much of an appropriate way to go. From a zoning perspective, the zoning in New York City does not count floor area that's for structural or mechanical purposes towards the building's maximum size, regardless of how big these spaces are. So in these super tall towers, those spaces can be up to 25% of their floor area. So it's dialed up again because this probably wasn't the intention of these zoning laws, but it is allowing these buildings to be extra tall due to the way that these mechanical floors are distributed throughout the building. And in some cases, like at Park Avenue, they're really, really tall. And so it's sort of adding to the overall height of the building in a way that isn't actually counted. So really only in New York can you get to this type of a situation where you've got brand new super tall buildings that are occupied and have not received their final occupancy certificates. The final thing that's also unique to New York is that the Staircode is always allowed for super slender towers of all different heights because it's one of the few places that still allows for a double helix type fire stair, meaning 2 stairs in 1 stair core. And in most buildings in the US, you need to separate distinct stairwells by a minimum ratio or a minimum distance so that they're far enough apart so that you don't have people getting stuck in one side of a building in an emergency event. And so if we look at 111 West 57th Street, for instance, it's only 18 meters wide and it has a slenderness ratio, meaning the width relative to the height, of 1 to 24, which means it's one of the most slender skyscrapers in the world. And so just for reference, a building is considered slender when its ratio is above 1 to 7. So we're almost 4 times that ratio here. So it's extremely thin. When you look at those plans, the fact that there's only 1 true stair core with 2 stairs within it also enables this type of super tall skinny skyscraper. And when you look at the plan here, you can see that. So why are these super tall towers having issues in New York? It seems to me it's because there's really a new species being developed here. It's a new type of building, and it really means that there will inevitably be growing pains. And so no matter how much it costs to build it, no matter how much it costs to purchase a condo, it's still something that's put together by hand, mostly, in pretty difficult circumstances, in a city that has a pretty outdated building code, a very strange permitting process, and zoning that may not be able to absorb this type of architecture. So it really is a variety of things that are only coming together in New York City. So thank you for watching, and thank you for your time.